Hi, I'm Mara Linsky-Deegan, and I'm the Associate Curator and Registrar here at the Charles H. MacNider Art Museum in Mason City, Iowa. And today we're going to talk about a piece that we have in our collection by Arthur Dove. And I'll just give you a little background about him first before we talk about this piece. This is a pretty cool piece, so there's a lot to talk about. So Arthur Dove was born in New York State in 1880, and his father was a manufacturer and also a person who created bricks. Like, he actually made the bricks, which I think is kind of a cool thing. And Arthur Dove, went to Hobart College and then went on to Cornell University, where he graduated in 1903. And he decided that he really enjoyed art and was going to be an illustrator. And so he, to make ends meet, to support himself, he actually worked in a lot of different magazines as an illustrator. So in 1908 to 1909, Arthur Dove traveled to Europe, and he especially traveled to France, where he met some other American artists who were living in France at the time, and he kind of decided that they were people that he wanted to hang out with. So he started working with other American artists and in France, and then he also started showing his work with theirs, and that was a way to kind of get his paintings and drawings out there for other people to see. He came back to the United States, to New York City, and he met a guy named Alfred Stieglitz. Now, Alfred Stieglitz was an artist himself. He was a photographer, but one of the other things he did was that he promoted artists and actually sometimes acted as an art dealer, which means he would sell people's artwork to other people. So Alfred Stieglitz, was putting together an exhibition of younger American painters. And he asked Arthur Dove if he wanted to be a part of that exhibition. And Arthur Dove said, yes, of course I do. So he was a part of that in 1910. And from that exhibition, he was able to kind of make his name in the American art world. And that means that people around who liked to buy art started to know who he was. Now, one of the cool things about Arthur Dove in his artwork was because he had traveled to Europe and he had worked with some Americans in Europe, but then he'd also worked with some European artists. And European artists at that time, in the early 1900s, were really excited by something kind of brand new, which was abstraction. So what abstraction means is not having a subject in the painting that looks exactly like a photograph or very realistic. A lot of abstract painters will make things that don't look like anything except for the painting itself. And what I mean by that is that sometimes it will just be splatters of paint, or sometimes it'll just be squares, or sometimes it'll just be shapes going back and forth, or just lines, instead of being something that looks like a person, like me. And so a lot of European artists were doing that, and Arthur Dove said, you know, that looks kind of cool. I don't know if I want to make things that don't look like anything at all, but I like how abstraction kind of takes things from real life and makes them look different. So what he started to do was paint things using a lot of color, bold color, really bright, and a lot of lines. So go ahead and take a look at this piece right here. I'll get out of the way so my shadow's not on there. And if you look really close, you can see that it actually is a clay wagon, and that's the name of this piece. And you can see that there's a wagon right here, and then there's some wheels, and maybe some mountains in the distance. And I'm not exactly sure what's over here. To me, that looks like maybe wheat or possibly corn. And then right here, it looks like maybe some farm implements, some things to do some farming with. But if you were to look at this, it doesn't look like a photograph of a wagon. It looks kind of like a wagon, but it's broken down into some more basic shapes. So Arthur Dove was really, really influenced by a few European painters that were doing something called Cubism. Now, what Cubism is taking the subject you want to either paint or draw and breaking it down in your mind into shapes. sometimes cubes. That's why it's called Cubism. So if you were going to paint, like if I was going to paint myself in a cubist way, I would take my face and think, what shapes make up my face? So I'd maybe make a triangle for my nose, and maybe make some ovals for my eyes, and maybe even an oval for my mouth. And my whole head would be a circle, and I would take those shapes and make them pretty basic. So I wouldn't get all detailed. I would just go triangle, oval, 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 circle. And then that's how I would make my face. But what makes the Cubists kind of unique is that they would do that, but then they would also show different angles of my face at the same time. And what I mean by that is they might make a triangle for my nose, kind of sticking out the front, and then they might make another triangle for my nose from the side. So it's like you're looking at me from the front, and you're looking at me from the side at the same time. So it's kind of cool. If you ever want to look up that, again, get permission, and you can look up a gentleman named Pablo Picasso and Cubism, and you can kind of get an idea of what Cubist paintings look like. So Arthur Dove lived the second part of his life in and around New York State, and he lived for some of it on Long Island, which is a big giant island right off of New York City, right just outside of New York City. And while he was there, he liked to do different series of paintings, and a series of paintings is when you paint the same subject over and over and over again. And one of the series he did was of farm equipment and implements. So I think this one here probably would have fit in with that pretty nicely, since it is a clay wagon with, like I said, some farm implements right down here. Arthur Dove, he passed away after having a heart attack in 1946, and he was actually pretty influential, which means he inspired other artists in the United States to not always paint something that's very realistic, but to do things that are a little bit more abstract. So other artists, like people like Jackson Pollock, and there's another artist named Mark Rothko, were kind of influenced by him to really focus on color and shape and lines, and not so much on making things look really realistic. So that's a cool thing that Arthur Dove helped other American artists